people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
De la noche, Stephanie Piñeiro.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. It appears that Iana Verduzco, otherwise known as Right Hook Roxy, has just inked a deal with Tom Loeffler. She took to his social media and stated, "I'm excited to announce I just signed with Tom Loeffler and 360 Boxing Promotions. Tom and his team at 360 Promotions have been great to work with and have terrific ideas for my future. Sky's the limit. Watch me work." This is a good signing, beneficial to both parties, both to Tom and to Roxy. I've actually heard nothing but good things about Tom Loeffler, that he's one of the quote-unquote good guys in boxing, not the kind of guy to backdoor his own fighter or screw them over. He rose to fame by promoting Gennady Golovkin in the days of HBO, certainly has an eye for talent. While he hasn't found the next Gennady Golovkin, he has still been promoting shows on the West Coast, I believe it is, and he just signed Iana Verduzco, otherwise known as Right Hook Roxy, the young daughter of Coach Gloria, Coach G. Used to train multi-weight champion Yo Castavalle. She trains other fighters. She trains Right Hook Roxy. She trains her daughter, sports professional record of 2 wins with no losses, no draws, no recorded knockouts, not yet. She debuted as a professional late last year, and she's already had one fight, at least one, this one. The virtue of Roxy signing to Tom, activity. She's only 23 years old, with only 2 professional fights so far, and the virtue of signing to Tom, even though he's not a major promoter like a Matchroom or a Queensbury or a Top Rank or a Golden Boy, is he can at least get her those developmental fights she needs, those bring-along fights, those learning fights that she needs, that any young fighter needs this early in their career. Now, Roxy, she's only got 2 pro fights, but it's my understanding she also spent some time in Team Combat League. I've seen her, and she's good. Wouldn't waste no time talking about her if she wasn't. There are a lot of unbeaten fighters coming through, some better than others. I try to focus on the ones I think actually have a future, could go all the way. Iana's last fight was down there in the featherweight division. Featherweight, that's 126 pounds. That is a very, very deep division. That's where Amanda Serrano reigns as a unified champion, where Sky Nicholson is set to defend her WBC, and where Nina Menke just won the vacant IBF. That's where Iana's last fight took place. There's a lot of unbeaten up-and-comers there. Unbeaten Kara Sortingstall, unbeaten Tiara Brown, Sophia Leash, Sarah Liegman, Elizabeth Oshoba, Raven Chapman, Vivian Rodriguez. It's a densely populated division, but it's not just densely populated, it's talent-rich. A lot of these fighters, a lot of these unbeaten ones, some you might be a bit more familiar with than others, are very talented, even the ones you don't know about. This is where Iana's last fight took place. I'm going to assume that she's going to campaign here, at least for a while, build herself up, get some rounds in the bank, some fights, some experience. I don't know that she fights for a title here. She's 23 years old now, you gotta understand that. A fighter that young, their body is still growing. They are still maturing. It seems to me like Iana won't fight for a title until she moves up to 130 pounds. That's where Alicia Baumgartner currently reigns, as that division's undisputed champion. However, Roxy's not on a collision course with Alicia, because by the time Roxy moves up and is ready to fight for a title, Alicia will have long moved up herself. The landscape will be completely different by the time that Roxy has amassed enough experience that she's ready to fight for a title and has effectively climbed up those ranks. For now, the first order of business is activity, fighting in those 6-rounders, 8-rounders, and subsequent 10-rounders. She's got to get a cardio up, gotta get her lungs ready, gotta learn to pace herself.
All the good stuff.
Born in the San Fernando Valley in California.
Kangaroos get big up there.
There ain't no goddamn kangaroos in the San Fernando Valley.
That's not the point.
So Iana was born in California and is based out of California. I'm not sure, but I'm going to assume that this is a fighter of Mexican descent. So that's the best of both worlds. That's a fighter you can market to the Americans, market to the Mexicans, and we all know the lifeblood of boxing in the American market, it really is the Mexican-American boxing fan.
Yeah.
There's a fighter's ability and a fighter's marketability. I feel like Iana has the best of both. This is a marketable fighter and a capable fighter.
A southpaw.
Jeez Louise, is every southpaw in women's boxing going to the featherweight division? She's a southpaw, Karis Ardingstall's a southpaw.
Sky Nicholson's a southpaw, Sarah Liegman's a southpaw, Nina Menke's a southpaw, Amanda Serrano's a southpaw.
Yeesh.
Southpaw City in the featherweight division.
Will be some time before Rihanna's ready to face any one of those unbeaten up-and-comers. The saving grace is she has time, lots of time, because she's only 23 years old. It'll be a while before she fights one of them. It'll be a while before she fights for a title. But she just signed to Tom Loeffler, and I think she's in good hands.
I think the real Achilles heel of the sport happened with the multi-fight agreements with the networks back in the HBO and Showtime days.
Yes.
That was a cancer.
Right.
The second cancer was rematch clauses.
Ooh.
Yes.
All right.
That's another good yes.
Third cancer, comeback fights. All right.
If you lose on a
Yeah,
network.
that's what I'm saying. It's like, I couldn't imagine Sugar Ray Leonard or Marvin Hagler saying, "Oh, I need a rematch clause." I'd be like, "Are you crazy? I'm going to knock his head off." Right? I mean, they'd be insulted if you said something like that. So I think the multi-fight agreements had this provision that if you lost, they could terminate the contract. So as a result of it, managers and everybody said it's an annuity. Why take the risk?
It's one perpetual safety net after another, and we got more cancer than the Mayo Clinic.
That was Top Rank's Todd Duboef talking about what's led to the decline in boxing we've been seeing in America the last couple of years. Why is the sport flourishing in other markets like the British market or the Asian market, the Australian market, where here in America, what's supposed to be the mecca of boxing, it's in decline?
And he sang a familiar tune. He talked about the HBO days, exclusivity deals, the detrimental effect it has had on the sport.
The political boundary lines that divide the sport create a fragmented environment where things that need to happen don't. HBO fighters not fighting Showtime fighters, what eventually became Showtime fighters not fighting ESPN fighters or DAZN fighters.
It's not good.
Though for everything he mentioned, there are two sides to the coin. There's the good side and the bad side. So the good side of a platform having an exclusivity deal with a promoter is the fighters that are with that promoter have a home for their fights, and they garner the exposure from fighting on that particular platform. It's branding.
All the fighters you get used to seeing on an ESPN or a DAZN, it lends itself to the fighters' brand, the promoters' brand, and the platform's brand. That's the pro.
The con is these exclusivity deals are basically a commitment. So a network is not making a commitment to a promoter just to see that promoter's fighters trucked off to somebody else's platform. Remember, the network is giving the promoter money. They're giving them an annual budget to do shows and do fights for their fighters, promote their fighters, develop their fighters.
Right?
That's a commitment. That network, they're going to want a commitment from the promoter that those fighters they're developing, those stars that they're building, aren't just going to float away to be content for somebody else. And that's where the problems begin. These fighters don't fight those fighters because they fight over there and you fight over here.
There's problems.
You talk about rematch clauses, which are seemingly overused in this postmodern era. I don't recall in the previous eras of boxing this many rematch clauses being incorporated into a contract, where here today, it's commonplace.
It's gotta make sense.
You often hear that phrase used in the sport of boxing. It's gotta make sense, but make sense for who? Sometimes what makes sense for one doesn't make sense for some. So for that fighter that has the kind of marquee value where they can have a rematch clause regularly incorporated into every contract for every fight they have, it makes sense for them to have that rematch clause.
It's a safety net.
And maybe it makes sense for them to have that safety net, but in the market, in the open market, who says people want to see a second fight?
Who says people are going to want to pay for a rematch? Maybe it doesn't make sense to them, and maybe it doesn't make sense to your opponent, but in order to land the fight, they make that concession, that sacrifice. Did we really need two Devin Haney versus George Kambosos fights, did we? Do we really need to see Fury versus Usyk again? I mean, I'm gonna watch it, pay-per-view, I'm gonna buy it, but did it really need two fights? With those examples, you see what I'm getting at, that of course it might make sense to one party to incorporate a rematch clause into a contract to cover all the bases, that safety net. It makes sense for them, but perhaps not to everybody else. Pros and cons. I don't know if Todd mentioned it to Steve and Mario, but contract minimums have their role to play in this as well. That fighter A is guaranteed X amount of dollars every time he fights, irrespective of who he fights, and it can only go up, but it never goes down. It doesn't change. It's all in the name. Contract minimum. Another example of what might make sense for one might not make sense for some. So what if you have two fighters on two separate platforms that both have contract minimums? Robust contract minimums. To face each other, come together to do it, they're going to want even more. More up front. More guaranteed. And while the value of that particular fight might be more than what other fights they've already had, it might not be so much more to warrant what they want, because they're gonna want more. To the fighters and their managers, it's always supposed to work out to where they get more money. Always. Not saying they shouldn't get a little more, but if you want so much more that it exceeds the commercial value of the fight, you know what happens? What? The fight don't happen. It ends up stalling the fight, and we end up with marination, over-marination. There's way too much of that in today's boxing landscape. I think that's a direct byproduct of contract minimums, exclusivity deals. The contract minimums are a byproduct of the exclusivity deals. You ask yourself, if this is detrimental to the sport and it only helps to stall fights, then why are they guaranteeing the fighters so much money per fight? It's to ensure exclusivity. It's to ensure those fighters don't take somebody else's offer and go away, go somewhere else. To ensure that doesn't happen, they offer them a lot of money per fight. But as a result, that makes fights more expensive and more difficult to make. Exclusivity deals and high contract minimums have their role to play in why some fights take so long, why they get stalled in the first place. Well, the guys want so much goddamn money, and they want so much based on what they're already guaranteed. They're guaranteeing them too much. Those contract minimums, they've got to come down. The market needs a reset. Some of these fighters, they need a reality check. They may not want one. Who does? But sooner or later, they're gonna get one. The way things are going in the American boxing scene, we'll all be out on the street if something doesn't change, and something needs to. So once you can identify what the problems are, you know what to work towards, you've got a better idea of what to fix, what to augment, what to change. A bit more bipartisanship wouldn't hurt either. Just because two fighters fight on separate platforms doesn't mean you can't do a fight between them. The biggest fight the sport of boxing ever saw, the biggest fight commercially, Maypac. That involved two fighters that fight on two separate platforms under two different promotional banners. They came together and made the biggest fight in the history of boxing. Took them long enough. Remember, Wilder vs. Fury 2 was bigger than Wilder vs. Fury 1, and Wilder vs. Fury 2 was a co-promotion. Promoters need to look at their stallions, their ponies in the show, and someone else's, and see if there's an opportunity there. Coordinate, work together, build something together. There's a lot that needs fixing in the sport of boxing. That's just a few things, to name a few. Finally, in men's junior middleweight news, Samson Lewkowicz, the promoter of Sebastian Fundora, said, "The fight, Fundora versus Crawford, is already going to happen. It's bad business for Crawford to be trying to make a unified world champion look bad by spreading stupid rumors. You're 37 years old. Spend your time in training instead. You're going to need it," he said. And I don't know what rumor Terrence made up aside from the Sebastian Fundora fight being a possibility, being on the table. And Samson Lewkowicz and his guy, they said as much, that their focus now is the Crawford fight, not the Spence fight. So what's the false part? What's the false rumor? All he's doing is reciprocating the interest that you supposedly have in making the fight. It's not spreading rumors or falsehoods. He's not saying Sebastian Fundora wears sneakers in the pool or showers then shits. I think Samson's projecting.
He's accusing Terence Crawford of being guilty of something he does. I remember early last year, he told YSM Sports Media that they had a signed contract for a Benavidez versus David Morrell fight. Signed contract. Now, obviously, that didn't happen. A few weeks, months later, David Benavidez himself, his own fighter, called it fake news. He didn't sign anything.
He shot the story down.
Where it originated, where it all started, was with Samson Lewkowicz himself, telling the media they signed on to do a fight that wasn't done, that wasn't made. He was the one spreading falsehoods, and his own fighter exposed him. Enough isn't made of that.
Samson's accusing Crawford of doing something that he does on a regular basis.
Where did everybody get that Sebastian's injuries from the zoo fight would bench him for the majority of this year? They got it from Samson. Just for Sebastian to come out and say that he could have came back much sooner. His injuries weren't that bad. He was medically cleared.
When he spoke to the very delicious Cynthia Conte,
She asked him about his broken nose, and in so many words, he said, "What broken nose?"
see what I'm getting at?
Spreading rumors, spreading falsehoods. That's what Samson does. All Terence said is that the Fundora fight is a possibility. It is something that's on the table, though I'd wager
They haven't sat down yet.
that's why Samson is having this reaction, because they haven't sat down with each other yet, the two teams, to iron out a deal. But that's hardly spreading falsehoods, addressing the possibility of such a fight. And I hope that Terence has it, and I hope Sebastian has it.
You're doing the same thing. You said your focus now is fighting Terence. He ain't doing nothing you're not doing.
Remember when Samson Lewkowicz told the world that Terence Crawford would have to wait? Because what they wanted to do was fight Errol Spence immediately after. He went from saying that to saying Tim Tszyu would get his rematch.
As soon as he wants it, he could have it.
Then back over to the Spence stuff. We start hearing more rumors about a Spence fight at the end of the year. Then no Spence. Now it's Crawford.
This is what happens whenever Samson Lewkowicz is involved. Whenever he or one of his fighters are involved, there's a lot of unnecessary rumors, confusion, and it all trails back to him.
It's always the same. How easy are these guys going to be to negotiate with? Are they going to try to do a sides of the street thing to where, yeah, we'll fight Terence Crawford so long as it's on Amazon Prime?
It's gotta be on our side.
Even though the one bringing all the money, the Saudi money to the table, is Terence, not Sebastian. Sebastian's a good kid. God bless him. But he ain't got no marquee value yet. So if this fight is worth anything,
It's because of Terence and his relationship with Turkey.
so many of the Canelo fans have been laying into Terence Crawford, targeting Terence Crawford, tearing down Terence Crawford. These obsessed.
And why? Because he wanted to fight Canelo?
That makes him the enemy of the state? Because he wanted to fight Canelo? He never tore him down. He never trash-talked him. He just said he wanted to fight him. And that makes you mad?
They're saying things like Terence Crawford, he's got a thin resume, he never fought anybody, never beat anybody, he isn't worth any money, he can't sell.
It's all BS, because the biggest fight for the best money at junior middleweight is the Crawford fight. He's the guy with Saudi money behind him.
That doesn't make him Canelo, but he's hardly worthless.
He's worth something. He's worth something to Turkey, which is worth more than most of those guys, if not all of those guys, at junior middleweight.
Better get while the getting is good.